As parents, I feel like so much of our days are battled over this reality. Should we spend more quality time or focus really on quantity time? In the lives of our kids, is there primary time where it's actually more beneficial for us to be engaged than at other times? This can be a dark place for many parents. But today on the Celebrate Kids podcast, in this daily segment, Facing the Dark, Dr. Kathy's going to address this head on and help us unpack some of the realities here. As she does that, I want to let you know that this episode of the Celebrate Kids podcast, Facing the Dark, the daily segment, is brought to you by Verse Chocolate. Verse Chocolate is dark chocolate that's done better. It doesn't have chemicals. It's good for you. And it's sourced from people who work with farmers and workers in Africa to give them really sustainable wages. It's kind of a fun company and run by some friends of ours that want to see us carry on our ministry here at Celebrate Kids. I encourage you to go to versechocolate.com and order some today. Now let's get back to Dr. Kathy Cook.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So Dr. Kathy, Sarah Martinez is a stay-at-home momfluencer. I call that kind of in jest. She's an influencer on social media who is a stay-at-home mom, and she has a recent TikTok video on parenting that has over 500,000 views already. In the video, she highlights Jacques Penkeeps' 9-minute theory. Penkeeps was a neuroscientist who suggested that there are 3 specific 3-minute instances throughout a kid's day where a parent's presence is most needed. In Martinez's viral video, she lists Penkeeps' mommy and me intervals as 3 minutes after a kid wakes up, 3 minutes after they get home from school or daycare, and 3 minutes before they go to bed. Martinez notes, quote, "I always struggled with mom guilt and questioning if I was present enough. If this is true or not, I do find setting aside specific time to be present with my toddler with no phones out has made a real positive impact." So Dr. Kathy, what do you make of this? Are there really 3 times in a kid's day where a parent's presence does have a greater impact than at other times?
Probably. And I think that when they wake up, when they go to bed, and when they first come home from school or a visit to grandma's house or whatever, it makes a lot of sense. What I'm frightened by is that she and other moms who follow her might think that 9 minutes is good enough. So are there certain times? Yes. Is that all the time? Absolutely not. And I wouldn't want anyone to think that 9 minutes in a day is what a child deserves. I would add to their list, this researcher's list of, beginning of the day, end of the day, and when they first come home. That makes sense to me. I want you to spend time with kids when they need you. And this is when we put our phones down. When we hear the kid yell, "Mommy," and when the kid says, "Hey, come play dollies with me," or your little girl or boy says, "Hey, come play with trucks," then we stop what we're doing and we go and we sit down on the floor and we play. That's when kids want us. Kids tell me all the time, "I wish my parents liked me." Well, how do you know when you're liked? Well, they play with me and they want to play with me. So I think that's huge. So playtime, and then when do they need you? I think those are times that are super important, and they can be super inconvenient.
Yeah, they are. I mean, parenting is inconvenient, right? Like being a husband or a wife is inconvenient. Working with kids is inconvenient, right?
No.
But I don't think it's like inconvenient in that sense that we kind of like look at it as we might like inconvenient, like a call from the IRS might be inconvenient for my day, right?
That's good.
But there's something I kind of want to look at here a little bit from another angle, right? And that's this angle, our ministries celebrate kids, and we love just kind of being in that place of celebrating kids. But I want to step back and maybe kind of celebrate those who care for kids, kind of in a way, maybe, because we know that social media has increased anxiety in kids a lot. We talk about that a lot. But the way that Martinez kind of frames out this conversation makes it seem like maybe she's got some, I don't know, I might kind of, meld the 2 words together and call it momxiety or mom anxiety, right? And I think it's likely due to the fact that she is really an influencer on social media and finds a lot of her time is spent in social media. What do we as parents and people who care for kids really need to understand about how we frame out our day and kind of the way we prioritize things that we kind of build time for, space for. Things like, I would even say like social media, maybe quiet time, and talk about how that kind of impacts us, maybe even in relationship to how we engage and find enjoyment and celebrate our kids. Social media can feel like we're decompressing, right? As those that care for kids, but is that true? Are we really decompressing when we turn to things like social media? What do you think about that, Dr. Kathy?
Yeah, probably not. I do know that it can feel like a break from what we've been doing, and it can be maybe relaxing for a few minutes, if you will. But man, then the adrenaline kicks in, and how many likes did this post get, and how many views did this reel get? I think it can become very time in, like, it just sucks our time, right? And I think it changes our perspective. We can become so self-centered when we're on social media, and then we turn it off and we look away, and then we're with our children or with a spouse or with a roommate. And are we able to shift from that very self-centered brain space to, oh, there you are, let me pay attention to you now. But if we're not careful, all of the social media things can become anxiety producing. And I think it changes us. We become very self-focused. I think we become competitive. Am I doing as well as others are doing? Is my kid enrolled in as many things as the other kids are enrolled in? So I would ask again, why are we doing it? And what need are we trying to meet through our break with social media? Now, praise God if you're able to do 5 to 10 minutes and get off. Nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with an occasional 30 minutes. But if you're avoiding something that's more important, then maybe that would be a check in your spirit. If you realize that at the end of it, you're more anxious than it obviously did not do for you what you thought it would do. This is where we become self-aware, right?
I think that's totally right. Becoming kind of self-aware. I want to ask you this question kind of in relation to that, and also in relation to the earlier question that you addressed, that we should really be present when our kids kind of need us. And I think oftentimes we try to build out these spaces as parents kind of in our day where we can sort of let our hair down, maybe watch a show or, kind of have some time to decompress a little bit. How important is it for us to kind of be mindful that those times are interrupted? How do we kind of put ourselves in some of those mental spaces of saying, this is kind of just, we have to game up for this? Do you have any insight on how being present really does kind of inspire in kids a sense of security? Is there anything that you would speak to there about that for us as parents, that when we look to build these spaces out, that we do it with some intentionality to also understand the real goal that we have to, guide our kids and serve the Lord in doing this? What are your thoughts there on that?
For us to take time for ourselves to rest and have quiet and to be restored in whatever ways are best for us. It might be a chapter in the book that we're reading. It might be a phone call to a mom or a best friend. It might be for, 15 minutes of gardening in the sunshine, and we come back in the house and we're more present to our kids. I think our kids benefit when we demonstrate that they're so important to us that we will take the kind of break that we need to take so that we can come back and be fully present to them. And maybe we can teach them a rhythm of doing the same thing.
Yeah. Do you verbalize that? How do you kind of do that? Do you kind of let the kids know? I mean, does that create anxiety for them? Like, okay, I'm so stressful that my mom needs like 30 minutes from me. How do we kind of do that in a way that doesn't cause them to feel like they're the reason we have to take a break?
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, but sometimes they are the reason. Like sometimes I'm a huge believer in vulnerability, transparency, authenticity, honesty. I always say age appropriately. But, let's say that your kid wants you to play a game and you're not a board game person. That's totally legit, but you're a mom. And so you're going to play the game, but you're going to play it better after a long cup of coffee, or you're going to play it better after you get some work done in the fitness room in the, basement of your house or whatever. I think be honest and say, man, Jeremiah, I'm looking forward to playing the game. Mommy will have a better time if you wait 20 minutes so that mom can, takes care of something, and sometimes, and you and I have experienced this, Wayne, where we want to get involved in even recording this podcast, and there's something else on your mind that you want to share with me. And if you can get it off of your mind and into my mind, you do better. Now, I don't know if I do any better, but you do better. And I think kids can benefit from knowing that those kinds of rhythms are a part of life. And in taking care of ourselves, we're training them to be self-aware. And we talked in the show before about how important it is that they learn to self-regulate, which is very hard for a lot of our kids today to do.
Yeah, I think that's so true. To turn back to the kids with this kind of final question, I want to ask this. When we think of the way that kids really are wired, and I legitimately think that kids do have some kind of hard wiring in terms of how they see the world or interact with the world, right? But there are also things that are, I would maybe say, kind of like soft wired, or that we all kind of have, right? You've talked about this in 8th Grade Smarts, and I love the way that you kind of opened that we have this ability for us to kind of awaken these different smarts that God has given us, these logic ways of looking at the world, or kind of understanding and loving and finding joy in patterns and beauty, as somebody that would be kind of nature smart would be more inclined to. But everyone has all eights. How do we kind of take time, and how does our time and frequency kind of with our kids impact the development specifically related to the smarts? Do different kind of smarts benefit differently from certain specific kind of parent time or parent engagement? Does that 3 minutes per day, build kind of something special for somebody that is nature smart? And then also, does that kind of impact also then how they look at resiliency when mom and dad really have a focused 3 minutes when they come home and when they wake up and before they go to bed? Does that impact their resiliency? And then I kind of want to merge two questions together here. I'm so frustrating, I know, but this is just the way my mind works. I think about like the smarts and how kids are developing, but then also, should we really kind of hammer that? And does that encourage them? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, no, I love watching you think. For those who don't know, we're doing this on camera, and I'm watching the wheels. No, really relevant. The major thing I would say about awakening and strengthening smarts is it's actually very similar for all 8. It's interest causes ability. So if you want your children to have greater ability in logic smart, you want them to have more nature smart strengths so that they'll enjoy camping in the summer, or you want them to have a greater affinity for people smart so that they get better at reading body language and developing more solid friendships. They need interest in that, and they get their interest from watching us. What are we interested in? What do we talk about? What do we celebrate in ourselves and in them? And they'll be watching that, and they're going to want to become like dad. I mean, what a high compliment, to want to be like mom. A friend of mine just asked her children, what are your favorite things to do with your mom? And what are your favorite things to do with dad? And what a brilliant exercise, somewhat frightening, because you might not get the answers that you want. It might not be easy to facilitate what their favorite things are all the time, but to honor them and say, hey, I'm yours and you're mine. And, let's do this life together. So I don't know if that's relevant, but interest, ability, exposure to different ideas is key. If you want your kids to be logic smart, they've got to go to the right museums. If you want them to be picture smart, you got to go to, Hobby Lobby every once in a while and let them spend a couple of fun dollars on all the crafty kinds of things and let the kitchen table be a mess for a little bit. So exposure, interest, ability, celebrating, affirming, complimenting the things. And all of that builds resiliency, because resiliency is, requires effort and perseverance and diligence. Resiliency requires that I ask for help because I recognize I'm not good at everything right away. And so if we and our children are working on the same things together and developing greater interest and ability, they're going to see us stretch, and they're going to see us ask for help. They're going to see us celebrate that we've grown, and we're in our 30s and we're still gaining ground in something. That's going to encourage the kids to realize that they're not finished learning either, obviously.
As Dr. Kathy was talking, it reminded me of the calling of Samuel in Samuel chapter 3, and I'm going to begin reading it at verse 8. A third time the Lord called Samuel, and Samuel got up and went to Eli. He said, "Here am I, you called me." Eli realized that the Lord was calling the boy, so Eli told Samuel, "Go lie down, and if he calls you again, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. I'm reminded of the way that Samuel was really discipled and kind of mentored in some dynamic ways by Eli. Even though Eli's house was really in disarray, God calls and equips Samuel in really powerful ways, and Eli directs Samuel to really engage the Lord as the Lord is calling him. I wonder if for parents, for those of us that are working in these different settings, if we're really attentive and attuned to what the Lord is doing in the lives of our kids and the lives of our families, that can be a bright light for our kids that shines and cuts through some dark times. Let's be great listeners, great people who pray for our kids and who are attentive to what God is doing in our house. I want to thank you for listening to the Celebrate Kids podcast in this daily segment, Face in the Dark. Again, this episode is brought to you by Verse Chocolate, friends of ours who run a chocolate company that is without chemicals, cares for the workers, and tastes really good. Go to versechocolate.com and order some today. Thanks for listening to the Celebrate Kids podcast. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Cook, my name is Wayne Stender, and I'm looking forward to seeing you here again tomorrow.